Crossen, and this is a very special edition of Wrestling with Regret. Now, you might recall a little while ago, I released a review of the NWF Kids Pro Wrestling, the Untold story documentary. Not too long after I released that review, Shawn Crossen himself, the man who actually founded the NWF years ago, he actually stumbled upon the review, and he actually told me he was not mad at the fact that I did it. He told me that he actually appreciated the work that I put into it, and he realizes it's all entertainment, and of course, the things I say on this review show aren't meant to be taken totally seriously, so he understood the entertainment value of it, and he appreciated it. So it was after that initial contact that I realized I wanted to get in touch with him and interview him a little more in-depth about the NWF experience and, you know, the questions that came up to me and other people who saw the documentary as I was watching the documentary and writing the review and putting the review together. These questions that came into my mind that were never truly answered, in my opinion, when I watched the documentary. So Mr. Crossen was gracious enough to be interviewed by me a little while ago. I'm going to show you that interview right now. Well, I'm here with the founder of NWF Kids Pro Wrestling, the Crusher himself, Shawn Crossen. Mr. Crossen, thanks so much for being part of this interview.
Oh, thanks a lot, Brian. It's a pleasure to be doing an interview with you.
So it's pretty obvious that you were a huge wrestling fan growing up. What would you say were some of your biggest influences?
Well, for sure the AWA. When I was growing up, this was before Vince took over everything, and AWA was the thing. I mean, that was all we watched, and I was a big fan of the AWA, especially with Hogan. That's when Hogan was starting to run wild in the beginning, and he was the one that really got me interested in wrestling.
Were you and your friends, wrestling or fighting it out in the basement before you decided to put that stuff on television?
Charlie and I used to do we'd do mock fights. We would stage fights at the ice arena and get everybody convinced that we were in a fight. And that's kind of really where I guess maybe some of the initial ideas came from, us doing those mock fights, because we'd try to convince everybody they didn't know who we were, and he could, and it was still selling something. We were trying to sell the fact that we were doing this fight. That's probably where it started. But I think that and the combination of just wanting to be on TV, because when the cable people came to the house and explained public access, I mean, back then there was no internet, there was no YouTube, there was none of that, and just the idea that you could be on television, that's something I wanted to do.
Let me ask you this, would you ever watch stuff with your friends, watching AWA one night, and then you'd say after you see a spot or some kind of sequence, you go, oh, well, we're going to take that spot and we're going to do it on NWF the next day. Did you ever have any moments like that?
Oh yeah, we took a lot of angles and modified them, for sure. I was not a fan of Vince in the 80s. I couldn't stand him. I didn't like the product he was doing. I was more that Vern Gagne's real, this is real, wrestling's real look. That was my image, and I didn't like that whole let's have fun, clowns, weddings, and on tight and all that stuff. I just, I wasn't a fan of that, but a lot of the kids were. Most everybody was. So they would bring in, and they want to do all these other things. I'm like, no, let's stick more to the basics. I just wasn't a fan of this in the beginning. I didn't like that clowning around type look. I wanted it to be more serious.
So this is the burning question that I repeated a lot in the review, my early review of NWF, the documentary, and that was, where were the parents in all this? I understand that, now we live in a real big bubble where we want to protect our kids all the time, but even then, if I were a parent back then, I probably would have looked at what you guys were doing and went, that doesn't look 100% safe, what was the parental involvement in this? Did it take any convincing to get them to go on board with this project?
I never thought of it when I did the documentary as much because we didn't think of it then. And you got to put yourself back in time. You really got to forget backyard wrestling. You got to forget that even happened, because that didn't even exist. The terminology wasn't even there. So you got to just put yourself back in time and understand how it started. We just started out doing this stuff on mattresses as kids, week after week, just having fun, doing a video production, really. And that's what the parents see. And they've seen this slowly, very slowly, gradually progress. And as we kept doing things week after week, and they've seen us, committed to it. And they knew, all of them knew, believe me, that we weren't in there to hurt each other. And so they would just be, it would be no more different than taking their kids to basketball or football or baseball or, any other contact, I guess I should stick to more contact sports, like football or hockey. And that was really the thought of it. They knew that, and they were entertained with it. They were at the matches, just, when we had our live events and stuff, they would come to them as well, and they'd usually help out. They would a lot of times the parents would help out at the ticket, selling the tickets at the door and stuff like that. They were involved to a little bit, just behind the scenes a little bit more, and only at the request of when we needed them, really.
So walk me through the process of booking a show at the Anoka Armory, because I know that with a lot of federations, in different states, nowadays you have to pay this real obscene insurance premium to run a show. You have to have a license, you got rental costs, all these big expenses. And I was just wondering, were there any hurdles like that for you when you were booking the Anoka Armory? From the documentary, it didn't seem like there were that many hurdles. I was just wondering what kind of stuff you guys had to go through.
No, and I'm surprised. To be honest with you, I'm surprised we didn't, because, and I guess I thought, my thinking was, well, it must be because it's the government, or the state, and they don't worry about it as much. But they didn't. They didn't have anything requirements like that at the time. The only thing they required was a down payment, and I believe the down payment was $50. It was very minimal, and the whole thing to rent that facility for the time we did would be about $300-400. Wasn't that expensive? And when I heard these kind of numbers, I'm like, this is manageable. But we didn't have $300 or $400. None of us worked. What I had to do is I had to go around and get sponsors. I would go around to all the businesses and say, hey, we're going to do this event. We've been on cable television. You've heard of our show. And most people had. You see, that's the thing. It would never work today because satellite television and everything have taken over. But back then, when it was just cable TV, it was pretty well known. I mean, we only had 40 or 50 channels in our town. And so people channel surfed all the time. They pop on our show. And after years of being on the television, people knew about it. And so it wasn't really that hard to get sponsors, to just give us $25, $50 and get their little business card and the program guide that we did. That's kind of how we did it.
So, partway through the documentary, we're introduced to Steve Angstrom, this guy who apparently lied about his age. You thought he was 16, turns out he was 26. At what point did you guys find out? How did you find out that he was so much older, and what was your reaction to it?
Well, it's kind of funny because I have two older sisters. They're about 7 years older than me. So they probably, at that time, they were probably in their early 20s, and they were out tanning in the backyard. And Steve, the schmuck that he was out there trying to, hit on him and everything, talking to him and saying, and they're like, and they're kind of in their mind, they're thinking he's one of us, and then I think they started asking questions, and he's like, no, I'm 26, and he's trying to show off, so he shows him a driver's license. And then I remember my sister comes in and he goes, do you know that he's 26 years old? And I said, no, I don't know. And so I said to him, and in fact, I think we even got the audio on camera on one of the shows. I could hear me in the background. I asked him, I said, why did you lie to me? And he told me, he said, he goes, I know you wouldn't have let me come on, but he goes, now that you've seen what I can do, he goes, if you want me, you want me. If you want me to leave, then I'll leave. I understand. And what could I say to that? The thing with Steve is he really was a fan of wrestling, but he was too small to make it with Eddie or anybody else. And it's funny that the parents and stuff didn't really. You think they would think, they would look at that too and think, why you got this guy hanging around here? What's going on? But they didn't, and I'm kind of surprised there. But then again, there was nothing to compare it to. Nothing had happened yet in the world of entertainment. That whole I think when the Michael Jackson thing broke out, it then made parents really think a lot more about it, and that kind of stuff. But back then they didn't. It kind of surprises me though. I was more mad that he just lied about it. If he would have been honest with it, it's the lying to me that I really didn't like. And he did a lot more of that later on. He wasn't being honest with me.
Was there any effort made in trying to get him for the documentary? Because it was something I said in the review, was that I think it'd be really great if you had some adult perspective, either from Steve or his friends or from the parents' perspective. Did you try and get any people like that? I think from my perspective, watching the documentary, it would have made the documentary so much of a deeper experience. Did you try and reach out to those people?
Yeah, we did. We tried to find. We could not find him. We tried, and I searched for his son, Danny Angstrom. I thought maybe if we could get a hold of him, he'd know how to get a hold of him. We searched and searched, but couldn't find him. In that documentary, I tried to get Scott Tronson. I tried to get Mr. Daniels. Scott Tronson didn't want to interview, so and And by the way, he's not an old man. You have this image, he's this old man. He was a young guy, probably in his early 20s, did not like professional wrestling, period. He was an anti-professional wrestling fan, and he even said so. So he was just, and he really didn't like kids. So the combination of us kids doing that, it did not interest him.
Shawn, you mentioned to me before this interview that during the process of running the NWF, you developed a working relationship with Midwest booker and wrestling trainer Eddie Sharkey, and you developed a working relationship with him. How did that come about?
I didn't know who he was, but when Steve explained it to me, and he says, yeah, he's trained the Road Warriors and Jesse Ventura, and I said, really? I said, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, let's go to one, and Steve wanted to go to one of his shows, and maybe we could meet him. I said, sure, let's do it. So we went to this event, and we kind of hung out, and Steve, the bullshitter that he is, managed his way to get into getting this with Eddie. And Eddie was really, the thing I remembered about Eddie Sharkey is he knew of us, he knew what we were doing, because by this time we were already on the news and everything. And he wanted to, first thing he said was, we really should get together sometime and try to do a promotion, do something together. I said, yeah, I was just thrilled that there was a guy in the wrestling business that wanted to talk to us. I was just, back then I was a sponge to anything like that. If somebody was interested in more publicity for our league, all the better. But Eddie's job, his business was making money. And when I look back at this now, I think the reason Eddie was interested in us at all was because he knew we were drawing people in our events. He was doing these little bar cards with 50 people. We were doing the Anoka Armory with 300. He wanted a piece of that action, and that is why he wanted to do an event with us. It had nothing to do with the fact that he liked that we were kids or that we, knew anything about the wrestling business even. He just knew that we were drawing money, and he wanted part of that money. That's exactly what it was.
So, after the NWF, it's done, it's folded, you start wrestling for Eddie Sharkey's Pro Wrestling America promotion. Tell me what that was like the first day you went into the locker room, because going from the NWF, which was your baby and you had full control of it, going to this foreign locker room where you were kind of a new kid and you really had no control.
When I was in that locker room back in those days, it was just kind of I would just hang back and I like to do my thing, and I really didn't. It was kind of a relief, Brian, because after doing the NWF for 7 years, I had my fill of running it. I really did. I just enjoyed the wrestling at that time. But not having to worry about doing all the advertising, putting posters up, doing the legwork, and all that goes along with it. It was kind of a relief, to be quite honest with you, just to be able to go in there and just do your thing in the ring. That really was.
Was there any animosity directed toward you from the other wrestlers, the more established veterans? Because I would imagine that coming in after running shows out of a basement or a garage or whatever, coming into this thing, and you're largely self-trained, to come into this place with these more established trained veterans, you get a lot of side glances. Did that ever happen to you?
Not too much. I really didn't. Again, I got to know all the guys so well. And they were really... once you get to know the other wrestlers, they're good guys, and they treat you like that. Had I just maybe jumped in there not knowing them and stuff, it probably might have been like that. Because I knew them over the years, since '86, I had pretty much knew his roster. I knew all the guys. When I'd go show up at his events, at Eddie's events, I'd bullshit with them in the back. They knew me, so they didn't have that kind of image with me at all.
So you started working for PWA, and I was watching some of your videos, and I admit you could move. You had a lot of good hops, really good elevation, and you moved quick. How long did you work for PWA, and did you work for any other places around there?
Well, for a little bit I did some stuff with the NCWA. I did a little bit with that, and then I mainly when Eddie gave me a call and said, hey, would you be interested? I said, sure. And I only did it, I wasn't doing it pretty much full-time, because at that time I was moving to Wisconsin and I had finished my degree in architectural design, and I was going to pretty much go in a different direction. So in the end there, I was really just doing it to give Troy the push, Troy Steenerson, because he really could have went further, and he had the talent. And I just figured if I could help put him over, I'll do it. And so that in the end, that's kind of what I was doing, was just really trying to give him a push. I knew my dad was not a fan of me doing this by any means, because again, this wasn't, the little guys weren't in it yet, so my dad would keep reminding me, you're just not big enough to really do this. So I got that going on in my ear. I have this architectural career that I just about to embark on, and So I had to make a decision, and I just decided that I'm just not gonna keep doing this. And not only that, Steve was up to something. I don't know what he did, but he told something to Eddie, and Eddie felt it best we just part ways, and I was fine with that. But so I've talked to Eddie since then, and it's all good now.
Do you have any regrets about your wrestling career and how in the NWF in general? Do you have any regrets on how either of those turned out?
Well, only regrets were some of those interpersonality things that I did. The thing we did with Rob was wrong. I shouldn't have never done that. But as far as regrets, I guess the only regret is we were going to do one of the events we were going to do was Starcade. We called it Starcade 87. Every match was going to be a cage match. That was my next big thing. I thought, if every match was a cage match, what kind of draw would that have? So we were going to build a cage, put it around the ring. We're going to have a cage match every single match, but we never got that event. Never happened. For whatever reason, I don't even remember what the reasons, but we just didn't get to that. We ended up doing a normal Armory event a few months later, but I wish we would have done that. I got the interviews and stuff that we dubbed for it, building up to it and everything, but we just never did the cage card.
It's funny, if you actually ran that all-cage show, you probably would have beat Dusty Rhodes by about 20 years, because everyone knows he went ahead and did that concept several years later in TNA with Lockdown.
Later.
So this is my last question, Shawn. What do you say would be the biggest or most important lesson that you learned from your time doing the NWF and running that promotion?
Well, just knowing that if you put your mind to something, you can accomplish it. That was really the lesson we learned. I really learned that if we really want to get something done, if you keep working at it, it doesn't matter if you're kids or adults, anything. If you put the effort in, you're going to get results.